So I'm going to call the meeting to order. Unless there are any objections, I just want to mention there are cookies, two kinds of cookies over there.
I have one.
If anybody's feeling like low sugar.
Good Lord.
So, thank you, Quorum, once again. This meeting initiates the heavy lifting phase of the FinCom season. And appreciate Chief Hurley and Chief Pauly coming to be the guinea pigs and get it out of the way, right? Here today, gone tonight. So,
Can we start with them?
well, I think we should take a look at the minutes from last meeting, and why don't we get those out of the way, because we didn't have to think about it.
December 18, 2018 be accepted as
Second.
Has everybody had a chance to glance at them?
Lance.
Okay, then all in favor of accepting minutes, thank you very much. Everything else we
It's a
can
novel.
wait on for sure.
Yeah.
Does everybody have their book or quick question, I'll ask both of you, are there any changes that we ought to be aware of to the budgets that we got in these books that are not gonna be easy to explain, or that we would need any kind of paper for?
In other words, is there an update to what we're looking
Yeah.
at?
No.
Great, so hopefully
I
everybody,
will tell you that when the selectmen voted on the fire chief's budget, they voted to recommend the budget as he presented it. You'll see that there's a little difference between what the town administrator recommended and what the chief recommended.
Okay.
And the select board voted to go with the chief's budget.
okay.
See the department budget?
Yes.
Oh, and before we go any further, I'd like to welcome some guests here. Hi, Helen.
Hi.
Good to see you, Dan. So, Chief Hurley, you're up.
Your first time.
I think everybody
Going through
met
this.
Chief Hurley when he was here to introduce himself.
And-
I'm not sure if everybody here was at that meeting.
Ron brought him along last year so he'd have the experience and know what would be expected.
The select board put me through the ringer last Tuesday, so it was like a warm-up.
That was nothing.
Yeah, oh, thanks.
Well,
Yeah, well, this,
we're
Sarah.
not quite so intimidating. Hi, Sarah. Find you a,
Let me grab one for you.
oh, thank you, Dan.
oh, I should probably mention, and I think this is correct, but since we don't have Jeff Cash here, Sarah, who would normally be an alternate, is sitting in as a regular member of the FinCom tonight. Everybody get that?
Yep.
Sarah would normally be an alternate, but Jeff is not here, so she
So
will
Sarah's going
be
to
a
be
regular
a
voting member. Yes.
Yay.
Sorry about me. Oh, no.
We're just introducing Chief Hurley. And, you want to slide a chair in, or do it from there?
I could, from here okay, or?
Yeah.
So we're gonna be starting into the public safety tab and find the police.
Move my chair, we got thank you.
I'll explain to you how all of this works, yes, every single thing.
Cool.
Yeah,
I do it with you.
you make the coffee.
Well, if it's okay, Mr. Chair, I was just gonna start with a quick, as Chief Bissett did last year, just a quick global view on the police budget. Really nothing exciting, no new positions, nothing, no major increases, except probably in the animal control department, trying to get that a little more under control for the upcoming budget year. As I told the select board last week, still not 100% sure on the impacts of marijuana to public safety yet. We're kind of entering year 4 of this with really no change, I guess you could say. There are some host agreements, there are different levels of to where shops may be opening up. It looks like Provincetown may be getting their first one
End of this
around the
month.
beginning of February,
Yeah.
end of this month. So, you know, impact to services yet, really hard to budget, or one area of focus that I was looking at, and I know the former chief, is just some training, you know, just to, you know, we have half of our staff that marijuana was illegal back then, and, you know, now the change in the law and the civil responsibilities, and just, I think a well-trained staff helps prevent a lot of stuff, especially at the supervisor's level, the sergeants, so there is a bit of an increase both in training overtime and training courses.
Is there any due diligence you can do on, and I don't know how many towns already have implemented shops, but what the consequence was to their police force or to their,
I mean, the initial opening, one was in Central Mass, one was in Western Mass. It overwhelmed their agency, because they were the first in the state, and it was a prolonged event where it was on the radar for a while. So I believe Leicester is not maybe 15 to 20 officers, if that. So when you're dealing with parking impact, and most of their impact was people coming in, purchasing and leaving. I think from the public safety standpoint, not only will purchasing be something we'll need to deal with, but just any consequences thereof. I mean, are we going to see any increase in public usage? Are we going to see increases in crime or driving under the influence? Or, I'm kind of attacking from that angle of, what are going to be any consequences at all for us as a result of it? And it's
May I
kind
ask,
of,
who pays for the details? I know that you're gonna need detail officers for parking. et
it'll be
cetera.
the shops that,
The shops, okay.
any impact to public safety, will come from the shop owners in cooperation. And again, the openings are gonna be probably the more problematic, and then as time go on. Another concern is, there are times of the year we run one officer shifts, average about 100 a year. And like anything, there's a cost factor for additional overtime to try to deal with that, but there's a staffing issue. I mean, people get tired, people get run down, and to try to keep, I'm not looking at increasing the department at the moment, but it's just, it's always been a concern. I've been here 25 years and it hasn't changed. It's just a way to manage the money you're given and the amount of people you have. But when I circle back to marijuana, this is gonna be a cash business. There will be a lot of cash on site. They should have a cash management plan to get this stuff moved out in a timely fashion, but unlike most businesses today, which are, could be 80-20 credit cards, this is an unusual business model with all cash. So, it's kind of tough having one officer in town and God forbid something happens and we're responding to it.
Because they can't bank locally either.
They, there is an agreement with, some places I believe are starting to take debit cards. So,
It's all intertied into the federal banking system.
I know,
That's in
but
credit cards.
somehow they can't take credit cards, but
It's a
somehow they're.
prepaid, I believe what they're doing is accepting prepaid cards, so it's not a bank debit card, it's like
Yeah,
a prepaid
that makes
cash
sense.
card from somewhere, so.
And I know,
The banking
both
is-
state and
Like a
federally,
PayPal
they
or Venmo
are
type thing?
trying to deal with that because, and this is not gonna go away. I mean,
No.
More states.
It's not gonna
are
go
to.
away until they fix the federal laws.
And the only other major, I know Rebecca asked, just to kind of look further down the line, I call it 3 to 5 years out. The current radio system that we all use across the state, also on the Cape, is about 22 years old currently. It's an analog system and it's getting old, it's getting run down. The town of Wellfleet and public safety, we don't have any financial responsibility except the equipment we purchase to run off the system.
Right.
This morning, the state came down to meet with the Cape Police and Fire Chiefs, and they are looking to push or move on to a digital system in the near future. They're already 10 years behind doing this project. They have cost estimates around $125 million. Back in 2018, if I have all the fact patterns correct, they went and tacked on an additional tax to the 911 bills of about an additional 75 cents. And they're trying to raise and appropriate the money for this statewide project.
And this is
And-
the infrastructure.
Well, infrastructure, and they're also going to deal with community by community to get us up and running with new equipment. And I know roughly the impact on my department would be between portables and mobile units in the cars, about 100,000 overall, and the state is looking at kicking in 85,000 of it.
But do we have any timeline for when this might happen?
The chiefs today tried pushing, and again, what's happening now is there's about 80 cells, 80 towers across the state. They want to get it to about 120 towers to improve reliability of the network. I know we can both vouch there are parts of Wellfleet that are dead zones that we would like to see eliminated. But like anything else, when the chiefs push and ask, they're hesitant, they're working on it. They want to see what infrastructure money they need currently to get towers now up to speed. But when they do get the digital ones built out and the older ones up to snuff, they will turn off the analog and hence the digital. So right now, their recommendation is obviously any capital spending from here on in, go digital. Like they're trying to get ahead of, unfortunately, some communities as of last year were purchasing $50,000 to $100,000 in portables that are gonna be paperweights. So I think we're in a good position. I think that unfortunately in my 5-year capital, there's nothing in there for portable radios yet, but maybe for next year, if the state's gonna pay about $85,000 and our cost would be wiring, extra batteries, miscellaneous stuff, I think we're in a good position. And I know fire has done some planning in the past to get some capital money put aside for that project.
Well, maybe by next year we'll have a timeline.
Yes, yeah, I mean, what they're saying now is they're gonna try to push the grant out because the availability, the radios that are gonna be on the state bid list that we're gonna have to buy to use their money are both analog/digital. So we can use the equipment on the current site, and then when they switch to digital, that's one of the mandates that you're gonna use state money, because they do wanna see new equipment purchased, however, it's gotta work on both systems. They're claiming that once the digital is 100% in and the analog is taken back, that you'll see prices come down for radios because now you won't need that analog part of it anymore. This grant is a one-time deal. Once your department is outfitted and
Right,
you're ready to
then
go,
any future upgrades.
yeah,
are-
if you increase or do anything, it'll be on the communities from there. So
Fair.
just as a more global outlook of potential bigger expense down the line. Outside of that, I have 2 budgets, police, which is 210, communications, 215. I'm not sure if there's any.
I have a couple of questions, but I'd like to cede my moment here to anybody else, if anyone has specific questions about the budgets, police budget.
Looks good to me.
So there were a couple of line items, and I'm just kind of curious to know what's driving the increase, and the ones that, you know, a lot of your budget is so sort of flat from year to year. It's the numbers that jump out that you know catch your attention. So, for example, specials has been up like about 30%, and that's A3, and overtime up about 30% over the 2019 actual. A6. I was just wondering what's driving that.
The, under the specials line, the increase there was the increased hours under the animal control. It'll be a reserve officer that will be fulfilling that role, so the additional salary money needed for that will be under there. It's also, we're still exploring that as a shared position with Eastham. We're still working the details out on that. So it's just, as you heard me say before at the board meeting last week, it's the complexity of the animal control, the issues that we're dealing with, the barn inspections, the quarantines, really the responsibility the state's put back on the communities, you know, has increased that. So much for the overtime. I mean, I know, I'm not sure if 19 was just an anomaly, but I know that we come, usually if not to the number, we go over it and take it out of different parts of salary, so I can try to look into that further for you as to why that is 101,984, because as a lieutenant, I would spend out the overtime and fill the shifts, and I know if we don't come down to 0, we go in the negative, but shift it around with other
Yeah,
salaries.
it looks like an anomaly because you almost
Yeah,
never come in
it's-
negative
yeah.
from what you project, but there it is, you know, so that was a question. The special event line, you might have explained this before, the 25,000, that looks like it showed up in 2020 and now is, I guess,
The
is that
special
a set
event-
aside kind of number?
Yeah, the special event line was, it kind of derived from 2 issues. One was the issues that we were having on the ocean side, the beaches, Cahoon in particular, and again, I mean, on a typical year, the overtime is so stretched, we're running those one-man shifts that to pool some resources towards some other things in town, it was kind of a concept that I had heard from in Provincetown where they deal with July 4th fireworks, carnival, like bigger events that shouldn't impact their day-to-day overtime obligation, but would require resources. So the $25,000 helps with additional police coverage, Oyster Fest weekend, which overwhelms us for a 3 to 4 day period. And again, a majority of the cost of that weekend is on Oyster Fest. However, there is police-related costs and additional call volume and arrests and things that happen. The beaches, July 4th, we do a full department recall for a parade, which typically that's a $6,000 to $8,000 obligation for just that one day there. So the special event line was just kind of created to take a little pressure off of our overtime line and fulfill these special requests that we're handling throughout the budget here.
How much of that did you use? Because it looks like in 2020, that was the first time this was a line item, right?
Yep.
So have you used any of it?
We're up, we have a balance of around 7,500 right now.
Right, because Oyster Fest, because you got
Yeah.
most of the summer and Oyster
Yeah.
Fest into that.
Yeah, so from here on in, when we have special requests for parades or school events, or, I mean, it was a hard thing to budget because there were also some times this past summer, just due to staffing issues, that we could not get people up on the beaches. We do draw in outside resources on the beaches also, and that's where this money comes from. If you've seen this past summer, Howard and the Sheriff's Department helped with their ATV units. That is paid for out of there. If I fully staffed all 10 weeks during the summer, we would probably have spent this down to almost zero. So some of the, if you want to call it savings, has been just not covering those weekends throughout the summer.
So what happens with those savings? Do they become free cash and get available for transfers or whatever?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a nit, I guess, but the doubling of the price of contract services?
Yep, on that one there, that was looking at trying for a one-year program I brought up to you in November on the lease of a motorcycle. There's quite a few communities on the Cape that for years have had that as a tool for them for a whole host of reasons, and it's a program that I'd like to implement for a year. It's a lease. It's basically a seasonal lease, and once the fall rolls around and the weather turns, they come back and take the bike back, and if we so choose to enroll in a lease for the, it's kind of it's what a lot of towns do. They don't get into purchasing them and having them.
Like May to October.
Yeah,
And the insurances are covered, like it's a built-in cost.
yeah,
but
it's
Everything's covered with it.
yeah, the equipment that comes, there may be some miscellaneous things that we may, small ticket items that we
What
would.
does one of those run you, just out of curiosity, if you were to buy one?
I heard between 30 to 40, maybe even up to 50, depending if you
And you
buy a
have to
new-
replace it like how often, every 4 or 5 years, or?
Yeah, I'm not a.
So I release them.
Yeah, well, and again, where this is kind of a new thing, I do have 2 department members that are recreational motorcycle. I would never put anybody on a
Right.
motorcycle that has no experience. There is a 1-week state mandated course and a safety course that they will go through. But I just see it in communities, especially when they run events or, the approachability of a police officer on
Yeah.
a bike, on foot, and on a motorcycle is substantially different than somebody in a car. That car is a real barrier at times, and it's a good community policing thing. We have the bike trail that our cruisers can't, it's just another tool that I think, for the cost, and again, I want to try it for a year and see if it's something that works.
Well, is the bike itself equipped with any special equipment, or is it like communications or anything, or is that all gonna be as
No,
as
I-
a patrol officer?
Yeah, the bid I looked at, that it would mostly come with the radio, some lighting, some sign, there may be some
Okay,
things that the officer, but I had one of my officers spec it out, and it could be, $500 to the $800 range to add some minor things to
It's a
it.
Harley.
Yeah.
What about training and insurance for the officer who's gonna be on the bike?
The training is provided free through the Howard Police Department. They have an officer up there that does the training. Insurance, I can look into that with Town Hall. I'm not sure any additional insurance or, you know, we just need coverage that you would if you drive a vehicle. He has his motorcycle permit. They would,
Oh, yeah.
you know, they would take a state certified class. So again, I'm not looking to put somebody on there that's, you know, never ridden a motorcycle before.
Good plan.
Yeah.
I was in France once and the motorcycle cop was riding along stopped cars, you know, like you get here in the summer, on one side of the bike, holding it like this and directing traffic off the side of the bike. I'd love to see that here in Lawford.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive. I have a question about the communications dispatcher, the number 215. The A1 line and the A3 line, full-time and overtime. I was just wondering how many people are involved. It's the number that went up from 256 to 293, which is about 15%, I guess.
My understanding on that, it was the actuals, they settled a contract, and in the FY19 budget, the money that was authorized at town meeting was not included, so when you try to catch up basically 2 budget years later, I think that's why you see the substantial.
So these were contractual obligations?
Yeah, they were contractual obligations, yeah. And the FY19, I don't think it was an actual true number at the time.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, what was the second?
Probably related, the overtime went from an actual of 26 to 44.
And what happens there, and I know that better, just from managing both the police and dispatch side, we have, you probably noticed the relief line. We would run short there, and where we would have part-time people pick up more of the slack than the full-time staff. So you would see that overtime be a little less used, but the reliefs we would overspend, so it would balance out there.
Okay.
So, anybody else have anything? So the only other thing we're asking everybody to do, and you've done it to some degree, I think, with the comments you made about the marijuana, is to the best of your ability, with no consequence to you if you're wrong, to kind of think 2-3 years ahead. And is there anything you see coming down in the way the town needs to be managed from your perspective that's going to have a significant impact on your budget requests 2-3 years out? Staffing would be the obvious.
I mean, some big items would be training. I would love to see, you know, the training increased. You know, we're trying to move it ahead a little bit each year, but you know, when you do that, it never seems like you're catching up. I mean, at times we're budgeted, and I mean, this current year we're putting 3 people through the academy. We have a $10,000 line item in the budget, and I can tell you that it costs between 12 to 15 to train each individual one. So right there, it affects, I can't train most of the guys this year because of this additional hiring. So, you know, I believe in training. I really think that, you know, if we can up instead of just a 4-day state mandated training, to try to get a little more there. The infrastructure for the radios, which I mentioned before. And the only other thing I know the chief commented on last year, and I'll bring up again, is our reserve program. Currently, we put out for advertisement our summer positions back the end of November. I have 2 applicants, and we're extending it to January 25th. And both the trend for full-time applicant pool and now the part-time applicant pool it's getting tough. For a whole host of reasons. We don't pay them well to start with. I know Provincetown is, you know, probably $3 to $4 more an hour. We're kind of the $16 to $17.50 range, where minimum wage is going to be $15 by 2023, I think. So, you know, that's something incrementally if we could tackle, but also housing, cost of living here. And I know when I was a summer cop, you at least want to break even before you leave for the summer. And it's really hard for these people coming on board. So to what degree, if we start going from 8 to 6 to 5 to 4 to 3 reserve officers, would that have on full-time staffing? Would it make sense then to increase the department to a 15? Something I'll continue to monitor and look at, but that could be a,
I guess that's one of the questions, is there an optimal number you have in mind that says, I need this many people to do the adequate job, and I'm looking like at a shortfall of 5 in the year because of
Yeah,
all the constraints you're talking about?
at the moment, it's one of the hard things, and you'll hear the fire chief too. First, I'm new
You
to
guys
this.
have similar issues.
Yeah, well, retention is really, between being a lieutenant and now chief since November, so call it a 10-year period, I think that we have been fully staffed for a total of 1 year, if we're lucky. So now you're looking at a 9-year window where we have not been fully staffed, and every time there's a retirement, an injury, or a resignation, it takes us about 12 to 18 months to really, truly replace that person back on the road again. So, if I sat here and said, boy, 17 officers would really get us to where we need to be, but really officers 14 through 17 are constantly training, resigning, retiring. It's something I could look at in the future, but the impact of marijuana and whatever services that may bring, and the diminishing of our reserve staff. Now, obviously, if you look at an additional 1 or 2 officers to eliminate that 100 officer single shift it could tackle versus trying to use overtime to solve that issue. But again, if you're short 2 or 3 people consistently, you're gonna be right back to one-man shifts again. And I'm, around the Cape, chiefs and Lower Cape, we're all worried about retention. I mean, it's a huge thing, and not a lot of people are getting into my line of work, at least. It's really I guess you could say we're not at a high point in law enforcement right now. It's not a major run to come do this job, so that's making it even harder for recruitment. And we would post a full-time job and get 20, 30 applicants, maybe depending on the economy, 40, and we got 12 this time around. And we whittled it down to only 8 interviews. We got a great candidate, very lucky, but when does that run out where you're down just picking between 2 or 3 people? And I'd rather leave the position vacant and wait for the right person than force a hire that may not be a good fit for town.
Sure.
So, I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Oh, it does, and I think one of the things that it's a theme we hear over and over and over again, the budgeting process. So our perspective is very often a reactive thing. It's like you try to fit the money to the situation, but it's hard to anticipate where the town's going, and it's hard to staff appropriately if you don't know where the town's going in terms of what its needs are going to be, which means you have to think ahead to budget. And it's almost an impossible task, but it's worth asking the question.
Just as another comparison, because I'm interested in numbers, and it's always good to have a comparison. And the next closest police department in size is Truro, where they have 14 sworn officers, they have 5 civilians. And just doing a comparison of FY20 budget, as far as overall, their budget is $202,000 bigger than ours, both police and communication. Their expense, let's see here, my expense line for FY20 was $118,635, and theirs was $232,207. I mean, that's a lot of money. Yeah, and I'm just trying to use a comparison to see, am I way off base? Am I too high? I can't use Provincetown. They have 20 officers. Eastham has 7. So
Truro has a very different spending pattern.
yeah, and don't forget also with our difference, which is around 10%. I also have 6 to 8 reserve officers that they don't have. Like, it's an additional staffing that we're carrying for, So I think that over the years, Chief Facette has tried to keep costs down and keep us, reasonable, so that, it's comparable to what we're doing. But it just is as an aside, when you start looking at a new position or more training or other ideas, that's what's going to inflate the budget. So,
Is there anything that we can do to attract officers? Is there anything that the town can do to attract officers Like obviously, you said mentioned housing and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, housing, really our reserve program, for those of you that have met our past hires, I mean, up until this hiring Matthew last night, from the chief down to the newest patrolman, we've all been summer officers here. And it's a really great on-the-job interview. The community gets to know, vice versa, so it's almost a no-brainer at times. And they do understand the cost of living and the impact. It's those candidates that blindly apply to Wellfleet and come down here and they go halfway through the process, both summer and full-time. And then they're like, oh my God, and then you lose candidates. And I know it's not just germane to me or police. We're trying to reach out to colleges, the Reserve Academy, but understand we're also fighting for the same pool of people. Provincetown, Truro, I think Truro's short 3 officers right now. I mean, so we're all fighting for the same people.
We should start a How's a Summer Cop. Seriously, like put it out to the community. There are people who have an extra room
Yeah.
for a summer cop.
Right,
It's short.
Right.
It's a short commitment,
Free pizzas.
and
You'll feel safer.
yeah, exactly. How's a summer
You'll
cop?
sleep at night.
Like
with
the
your
summer
house
cop.
summer cop.
Yeah, except more responsible.
Dan,
More
Dan,
boats.
can I ask you a real quick question? I pulled the 5-year financial forecast that was done, I'm guessing 2017?
Yep.
So that's what now, 3 years ago. The variance between, I'm guessing that the year-over-year increases were based on some notion of some kind of accelerator, 2%, 5%, whatever.
Yep.
So that would explain the variance between what we're seeing in actuality and what might be the target for 2021
Also, I
on
would
this
say one of the
three-year-old.
things in reference to what Chief Hurley was saying is we made a conscious effort for both of our public safety departments to increase our compensation levels, to get them up
Right,
so that if people were leaving us, they weren't leaving us just because they can make so much money somewhere else.
Yeah.
So we did that with both police and fire. We really made an attempt to be able to come close to what Eastham and Brewster were paying,
Yep.
so that we wouldn't lose that officer just because he could go across the border and make another $5,000 a year. So
so I know it might be anecdotal, but is that working? I mean, are we getting the sense from your employees that
This
they're
is-
happy now that the
too
compensation
soon.
is catching
Well,
up?
it's the
or not?
second year of the contract. I mean, I can tell you, for instance, in November, I had a resignation of a 16-year veteran who moved his family out of state. So it wasn't just a lower Cape problem.
Right.
It was a cost of Cape, Massachusetts. You know, there's a lot of components that go to it. And from what I'm seeing generationally and people that are coming, I don't think officers or fire, we're not seeing the 32-year career in one agency, and it's not always about money. Again, after working a few years and being the only officer on duty in the town is unnerving to some people, and they say, the pay's great, chief, you're great, it's a great town, I just don't want to work by myself. So that's another component. Housing is a component, pay is so we're seeing all various reasons, but the effort by Dan and administration to get some pay definitely helps. I mean, it's not gonna be detrimental, but it's only year 2, so,
Yeah, and I'm not sure how many people go into the job market thinking they're gonna work one job for 20, 30 years anyway.
Almost
You know, my kids do.
Well, I mean, in my case, when you went on a department, you were typically staying, unless you were moving up for promotional reasons or moving to another community to become chief. I mean, a lot of our retirees here have done 32 years. It's you see it more in our line of work. You don't see a lot of jumping around, and because you're talking about seniority and going back to midnight. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people would stay in a community, but what a trend I'm seeing is 4 years in Wellfleet, 2 years in Yarmouth, now I'm going DEA, state, like it's and the problem is really for pensionable years and what they're doing, it's more detrimental to them because they're jumping systems and state, local, federal, so that's really how our retirement system is set up. You kind of like stay put for your time.
Yeah.
As they
Yeah,
as
you
they
move
say.
out of state, you lose,
Yeah, so just probably more anecdotally, but.
Well, thanks. As you probably know, we initiated last year withholding a vote, of
We vote on
On
the
budgets.
budget as a whole, once we've
Because
spoken
we
to
got burned a few
everybody.
years ago by rushing to judgment and then getting caught up at the end, not having any latitude. But don't read into anything into that.
Yeah.
I think, that's-
And just another quick thing, I know it's not budget related, a quarterly report came out, if there's any thoughts, ideas, I can put a section in there, I know with the board, I do 1 to 3 month out concerns, I can, whatever tweaks you think you'd like to see in the report, just shoot me an email or just
Frankly,
get hold of me.
It would almost be easier if a major concern does come onto the horizon, we would rather just have that.
Okay.
The
Does the quarterly report, do you like them, cause
I know the select board likes them, I don't know that
okay,
we
it
spent.
could be a discussion for another day.
Yeah.
Just
so
Feel free to
just-
forward them.
But,
Okay,
yeah, somebody will read them.
stuff on the wood stove.
Thank you
Get
so
it
much.
I'll swap with you. How's
Thank
that?
you.
Are you staying?
Yes,
Oh, that's my ruler.
throw the ruler at the chair, it's not a good start to the
I
month.
know, right?
Now, that's how things go.
One of the
Thank you,
things
Chief
that
Early.
we don't want to change with both police and fire is some of our officers want to go where there's more action.
Yes,
So the fact that
I,
this is a very
Right.
safe community,
yes,
and not too much action.
We'll take it.
that
Some
did-
of our officers, the younger officers, want to go someplace where they get more experience with, there's something
with more
fire and
interesting
rescue.
calls.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that thought did cross my mind when the question was asked, I was like, more
Remember the
crime, can we offer them more crime?
250th bonfire, maybe we could just set one, every year have a big bonfire party.
We'll
Yeah.
have one more
Oyster
before I
Fest does
retire.
the job.
My response to that at the select board last year was, or somewhere, if that's what they want, they should go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because we don't want that.
Well,
They can get their excitement when they play their video games. Sorry.
I'm assuming you were kidding about being beat up by the select board, but I hope this was
No,
a little gentler. Chief Pauly, thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you.
On
If
behalf
I
of
may,
FinCom.
before we get into the fire department budget, I'd like to say something about the police chief's thoughts. I think he's too conservative in that, from my perspective, and I was a law enforcement officer in the State Fire Marshal's office in New Hampshire. Law enforcement, different way of looking at things. One person, one officer shifts are unacceptable. They're a risk to public safety, and they're a risk to the officer who's working. And there are times when that officer has to be compelled to be taken out of town. Often at times with, responding with an issue, with an individual that we have to transport in the ambulance through what we call Section 12 or emotional mental health issue. That officer has to go in the back of the ambulance to protect the patient and the firefighter, EMTs, paramedics. And I know, this is the time that I've been here, we've had this discussion about one officer shifts, and I find that to be unacceptable. And I'm not, again, casting aspersions or making judgments, but from a public safety standpoint, we need to move away from that and ensure that that doesn't happen, whether it's a combination of overtime or additional person or two. I just feel strongly about it. There are times, I tend to stay up late at night. And when I do, I keep my radio on, and that scans all the local Outer Cape Fire Departments and also Wellfleet Police. And there's been a couple of times in the almost 7 years I've been here, that an officer cannot be reached by dispatch, police officer. Because either he or she is in a bad location, or there's just certain things going on. And on at least 2 occasions, I've gone and gotten in the fire car and headed in that direction. And then the officer would respond, they're available or they're all set. I just think that it's important.
Yeah.
I think it's critically important to public safety. And I'll just leave it at that.
well, thank you. Unfortunately, we're not in a position to actually hire somebody.
I'm just, I think that's something that,
Yeah, no.
that needs to be said.
It's an important consideration, and I think anybody who is watching this, it's good for them to hear.
Well, considering how many bankers you have sitting around the table. We are not allowed to have one people,
Yeah, we have to have two,
We have to have
two
Yeah.
minimum
in
two
the
people
bank,
in the branch.
so.
Of course.
Even our library is required to have at least 2 people.
So then how would we fix that problem?
And I'm not meaning to put the chief on the
Going
spot,
to
I think
require
that's.
tax-
No, that's
going to
a
require
concern
an
of you,
override.
yeah, that's, yeah. That's definitely a concern.
All right, so
I'm
shall we
sorry.
move on to the fire budget?
Absolutely, please, thank you.
Looks like you were able to get the ladder truck that you were discussing.
Well, we still have that, again, if you look at some things kind of globally, we have a verbal agreement with that. I'll be chatting with the town administrator, we have to go out to bid to purchase the particular vehicle. So we have to put a little bid procurement process in place. But, yes, so, you know, we have a handshake agreement, which I'm quite confident, but we have to go through the legal process to make sure we do it the proper way.
Well, I do want to congratulate you again for finding this thing and getting that going. That was a coup.
When will you know?
Mr. Watt and I will get together, we'll do something in the next few weeks and get the document out there throughout the procurement process. But again, I can't say too much, but we're in conversation with the community that is trading this vehicle in, and we have a good understanding of what our needs are and what our expectations are. So I'm confident that we're going to be able to make it work.
Excellent. Okay, moving on.
So,
Well, just one thing again to comment on Chief Hurley's, we'll get things, I guess we'll get the easy stuff out of the way. We have put away some money for the radio replacement system through the capital program. The whole situation with, we have a very, very good radio system that is basically built and supported by the state police. It's an 800 system. And there's a series of towers that go up and down Cape Cod. And I'm sure you've heard this before, and I apologize, but just to refresh everyone's memories. It's an analog system. Analog is outdated. When I was fire chief in Milford, New Hampshire, and I left in 2007, already New Hampshire State Police was working and have initiated since then the digital system. It's the same type of concept. So we're a ways behind. In the last 7 years that I've had to replace an occasional mobile radio or a portable radio, we've replaced it with an analog digital
Hybrid.
System, radio,
Yeah.
that's capable of doing both.
Okay.
Because it's a little bit more money on the front end, but the radio will last 20 years on the other end when the changeover happens.
That makes sense.
So we have put together through the fire department capital plan, I'm thinking about somewhere around $165,000 that we've got set aside over the last few years. It's in this year's budget. It's a 5-year plan in anticipation that there would not be any money coming either through federal or state grants or budgeting. And today was the first time that we heard that the state was actually thinking about or contemplating putting something forward. So that's the good news. The bad news is if they don't, on the fire department side, we'll have money set aside. The good news is if they do, and it's a matching grant or matching funds, that we'll have a lot of money, a substantial amount of money, to turn back to the town. But, so, you know, we've anticipated this changeover for the last several years, and fortunately we've been able to budget for that, but hopefully the state will come through. And I will be going for a federal grant again this year, which again, we haven't received a federal grant for radios. We've applied, we have not received it through the AFG grant program, but we'll continue to try.
is there any implication in the operating budget to the transition over from one system to another? In
Not-
terms of staffing or training?
Not
or-
staffing, minimal training, but not a staffing issue. Because as Chief Hurley said, you know, basically there'll be new radios put into the apparatus, new portable radios put into the apparatus, new portable radios assigned to personnel. So it just, my thought is that we want to do this all at once on the fire department side, because you don't have multiple versions of radios, models, and different buttons, and it just becomes very problematic. If you do it all at once, then everyone gets trained the same way, everyone becomes comfortable and educated on, because radios are pretty complex nowadays. not like it used to be.
Looks like your drawer full of old cell phones.
Well, it's like, exactly, I was gonna use that analogy, Fred, because if you look at the old flip phone you had versus what we have today, it's frightening. You don't know, for my generations, it's frightening. So, that's the kind of the big issue. There's one difference, in the town administrator's recommended budget and the fire department recommended budget was overtime. And we can have a discussion about that if you'd like. I don't know.
This is the one that the select board voted, is this the big difference on?
That's the big difference in the operational budget. Yeah, I think it's $42,000 difference. What we do with our overtime, is that we take a 5-year look at overtime and we average it out over 3 different scenarios, or 3 different, yes, I guess scenarios. And we always take the middle one. And we have found in the last couple of years when we've done that, that we've been able to manage that number, even when we've had some situations where we've had an extended, someone out on illness or injury. So the number that we proposed was the middle of the 3 scenarios. As town administrator and I discussed at last week's select board's meeting, you know, we just have a little difference of opinion as to what that number is. You know, I think the number that we proposed is one that will work, and we will not, barring no unforeseen circumstances of long-term injury or illness or vacancy, that it's hopeful that we'll be able to stay within that number. If we can't, then we would come back to the April of 2021 town meeting to supplement that line item, which has happened in the past in terms of having to supplement that line item. The townspeople have always been supportive of that, but we haven't had to do that in the last 2 years because we've been able to work within the number that was
So
approved.
you found a formula that seems to work for you.
Well, we have, but again, Janet, if I may, all it takes is one individual to be out on a extended leave, or, as the chief said, it takes us a minimum of 4 months to vacate, or to fill a vacated position.
This is why it's so crazy for every little town to have its own department. If this was all regionalized, many of these problems would be alleviated.
Well, certainly reduced or better managed,
Yeah,
and I totally, absolutely agree with you, but that's just not reality.
I know.
Right now.
And it's not happening anytime soon either, so I get it.
So,
I have a, Fred, can I just?
yeah, no, please.
So the difference between the $42,000+, the difference between the actual or the departmental and the TA, we're talking about what's anticipated to be happening in the future. If you actually need those officers because of that, so this is, if the 325 gets in and something happens, you need it, you are still able to secure the rest of the money and not have a public safety issue.
Well,
is that a fair statement?
Well, the statement is that my very first year here, we had a overtime budget that was, we knew that we were going to have to exceed. And still getting my feet wet and being part of, as the new fire chief, even though I've been a fire chief in 2 other communities. But, and Mr. Tucanian was the town administrator, and I went to Harry and I said, we're gonna go over this overtime budget. Now, I cannot fill shifts, or make a decision not to fill certain shifts. I said, but that will jeopardize our ambulance license with the state. So we have to have a minimum of so many people on duty to maintain our paramedic and advanced life support license. And I said that will also get to potentially could happen is that we may not be able to run the ambulance the way it should be run from time to time. And his words were, fill the shifts. Fill the shifts. And Dan and I haven't had to have this conversation, but, and I can't speak for him, but unless I'm given direction from the board or from town administrator, and I will resist the direction, I will fill the shifts.
So my point being that, you know, discussing that much of a difference in the budget, I would hate to think that because of a monetary shortfall of that amount, that we would be not filling shifts and putting things in jeopardy. So I wanna make sure when I'm looking at the budget and voting on certain budgets, that you know, don't ever have to be in a position where that ambulance doesn't run or something doesn't happen because we're worried about, you know, making that.
Because of the, if I may, because of the, you know, that we've gotten 5 new positions over the last 3.5 years, 5 new full-time positions.
Okay.
The first ambulance will always go out. Whether we can staff the second ambulance or an engine, is doubtful. It's doubtful. So, and looking down the road, we need to have a minimum of 4 people on shift around the clock. So we have a 4-group system. We need to have a minimum of 4 people, full-time people on the shift. So that's 16 people, full-time people. And then fire chief, the fire prevention officer are on days, and then we have a we call a daytime person that's on a 4-day work week that rotates around as a buffer, if you will, or that. Up until the last year, we've been able to manage and deal with the full-time personnel we have because of the call force, the on-call members.
Yep.
We're down to 4.
Yep.
2 years ago, we had 16 on staff. Now we're down to 4. And I don't have anyone solidly coming in and knocking on the door. And as I mentioned last Tuesday night with the select board, I know we'll have a minimum of 2 people retiring in the next 2 years, 2.5 years.
Full-time?
Call people.
members.
Call members. And I can't go into the reasons why because of personnel issues, but I know that is going to happen. And with no one else coming on the call side.
Yeah, then you're gonna have to rely on the overtime.
We're gonna have to
hire.
We're gonna have to hire
Oh,
full-time
yeah, no,
people
we're gonna have to
because,
hire for that.
again, as I mentioned last Tuesday night, we can put $1 million into overtime, but if I don't have enough full-time, if I don't have enough people,
You're not gonna spend it because
there's no one's available.
Right, yeah, no, I get it, yeah.
So this summer, we had to put a policy in place because we were so busy and we were down one individual because that individual was out for about 5 months on major surgery, not job related, but major surgery where that person couldn't come back to work. Until that person was cleared and was fully healed, that we had to put a policy in place for the first time in my career that we couldn't fill an overtime shift because people weren't available to take it or were not able to take it or didn't want to take it or couldn't take it because they'd already worked multiple shifts. So we had to put a policy in place to say every morning if we have a shift and we call down a card system to see who's available to come back overtime, that if no one's available to take it or can't take it, then I have to order someone to stay at work. So you have to order someone who's worked a 24-hour shift to stay at work. And I've never had to do that in my career. And we've had to do it this past summer. So that tells a story. It tells, I think, a story, and this is just the beginning. It's like the tip of the iceberg. Because we're all, as Chief said, we're all competing for the same people.
Yeah.
So let me
I
ask,
think
let me
you've
ask
been
you,
great at articulating that over the last couple of years, as, you know, and I like the continuity that you bring with the urgency of the issues. I just wanted to make sure that so it's less. No, never mind, I digress. I wanna make sure if you have the availability and we have the need and you have to spend that money, that you have the ability to do it through another mechanism.
Isn't it the transfers from free cash?
Thank you.
Yes.
So if they're ever
You're good.
in
It's all
that
good.
situation, there's always a
It's the
pot
way
of
there's
money
free cash.
for
Good.
overtime.
My response would be the same as Harry's, is fill the position.
Fill a position.
Fill the spot.
Exactly.
Good.
We're
I just
never
wanted
We're
to.
never gonna say we don't have the money
We
in the
don't have
budget.
the money,
yeah,
get
but
that guy off
yeah,
the
you have to
ambulance,
be
yeah, that's
sure.
what I don't, yeah.
So if I may just quickly address to Dan, if if we were to recommend the department budget on this, what does that do to your calculations?
We'll still be okay. Still be okay.
And keep in mind, it's the selectmen's budget that comes to town meeting,
Correct.
so.
I just wanted
That's the
to,
figure we're looking at right now, 367,499, not 325.
I know.
So here's my question, and I think it's sort of a concatenation of all of them, actually. As Kathy just said, the story changes in terms of where the emphasis is year over year, but the story doesn't change a whole lot. And it's a similar story with the police department. It's like too few people want the jobs. Maybe we're offering too few jobs at too low a rate. Maybe that's a factor, or maybe it's lifestyle on the Cape, or maybe it's just this generation, or whatever it is. There's a note here on page 11 that you're gonna need 5 full-time positions to meet your requirements in the next 2 to 3 years. It doesn't say what that's gonna cost necessarily, and that would be an interesting thing to know, ballpark.
Sure.
But I've always had this sort of generic question when I've heard the presentation about where we fall short, is there a model? And you mentioned somewhere, I think in the report, maybe in the preamble, that the model has changed, and you draw attention to the fact that the on-calls are now down to 4, where they used to be 16, and maybe that is indicative of the fact that we're not getting back to 16 ever, that is just a reality. That isn't just like a temporary lull.
It's not a wave, if you will.
Right.
Yes.
Right, so if that's the case, it suggests that maybe, and maybe is really the word, maybe there is an alternative model going forward, or maybe there isn't. Maybe the old model worked, doesn't work anymore, but we don't know what will replace it, or we don't even have an idea of what would replace it. I guess I'm asking which is it?
Well-
Is the 5 full-time members coming on with some other wrinkles a step towards a model that is sustainable? Or are we kind of at sea right now, just saying, well, the old model doesn't work, but we have no idea?
No,
We're doing Band-Aids here.
No, I think we're moving in the right direction. We've been moving in the right, in my view, we've been moving in the right direction in the last few years. I firmly believe we will never see the model of 16 on-call personnel ever again. And that's just, it's just not Wellfleet, it's reality in the fire service. Pretty much any young individual, I hate to use the term young, but most of the individuals that come in looking to get on the fire department as a call member, their ultimate goal in the last 10 years has been to utilize that as a place to gain experience, to get some training, to get into an organization and move full-time. And that has been consistent, not in just in Wellfleet, but certainly across Cape Cod, across the Commonwealth, across, I think, a good part of the country. The days of having someone who is has a full-time employment, you know, as a banker, as a fisherman, as an appliance repair person, doesn't matter what their skill is, what their full-time occupation is. Those, and then having that individual sign up to be a call firefighter, call firefighter, those days are gone. So that model is basically, if it's not dead, it's dying. So
It's on its deathbed.
it is certainly something that is not sustainable, and it's certainly not even achievable or realistic on Cape Cod. So then we have to look at supplementing those positions with full-time personnel. So in this 2021 budget, it is separate from what the budget submission is. I'm gonna be asking for 2 more full-time people. And then next year, in 2022, I'll be asking for 2 more full-time people. And then we'll have enough money in the existing department budget that when the retirements happen in the 3rd year of this scenario, that we should be able to fill that 5th position out of existing funding. Now, So the model that we have to implement is the 5 full-time positions over the next 3 budget cycles, including the one that's coming up that we're talking about. And again, with the approval of the town administrator and the board, I will seek federal grant money to help supplement that,
Right.
to give us a little bit of some breathing room, but again, I'm not optimistic.
Right, but you have
Well, I have a
situations.
plan in place.
Yes.
And perhaps I've not put it out enough, but that's the plan. So that is what I call it the Eastham model. Because Eastham has basically moved in that direction and they're 10 years, 12 years ahead of us. But that they saw, or they experienced what we are now experiencing 15 years ago, and they moved in that direction. And we're getting there. We have to do it, in a manner that makes sense and that's fiscally responsible, financially doable, and I believe it is.
So I know
That's the model.
I know there's been talk about, and there's always talk about regionalization. Has there ever been talk, say, about Eastham and, let's say, Wellfleet and Eastham having a smaller subset of their entire staff shareable? Not where one whole staff would potentially come to the other,
Right.
the other town, but where maybe there's a floating group of 3 or 4 where you share the cost of them and they go where they're needed.
That's an interesting concept, Fred, but the challenges with that is that certainly from middle of April to the middle of October, neither department has enough people available for that season that we're both so busy at. And mutual aid works, and mutual aid works well. However, as I articulated the other night for the select board, you still have to have a minimum number of people on duty to handle the request for assistance. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is that we're dealing with 2 different employee organizations, 2 different organized union bargaining agreements.
They don't do floaters.
And typically,
Go figure.
the International Association of Firefighters does not promote that way of thinking. And I'm not saying it never will happen, but for what our immediate needs are, and I say immediate, I'm talking the next 2 to 3 years, I just don't see that it's doable.
All right.
Good thought though, Fred.
Well, we in every area of town management, we run into the seasonality of the town, pretty much, right? We have a bell curve of need, and the staff you have in January can be sitting around, playing pinochle, and then in July you can't find, you can't find a resource.
Fred, may I ask a question for you?
Of course.
So you answered my first question already about mutual aid, and you explained how well it works. This year, off the top of your head, and maybe you know exactly, how many mutual aid calls were there, and what triggers a mutual aid call? And how much did it cost us? Because I don't find any line item that refers to it.
Well, mutual aid is never costed out because it's mutual aid, so we don't assign a dollar value to it. In other words, we don't assign, if we send 2 or 3 personnel to Eastham or Truro, those folks are either on shift, on duty if you will, or they're coming back, so we don't cost out the hourly rate.
Okay.
I can tell you, in anticipation of our the conversation with the board, I did just a very, very quick research for 2019, because we just closed out the numbers. And for every time that we went mutual aid, whether it was to Eastham or Truro, Provincetown, the Outer Cape, for every single response that we went mutual aid, we requested 2 responses to come to Wellfleet. So that tells a story. And that story that it tells me is that we're not meeting our end obligations under mutual aid, and no one has complained yet, but fire chiefs get together and we talk.
Yeah.
And we jab each other once in a while. or all the time, but, so, you know, every time that we go somewhere, we're asking some other community to come to us twice.
But ballpark, how many times did that happen, ballpark in 2019, please?
That we supplied or that we
That we
requested?
requested preferably, but also that we supply, well, it's 1 to 2.
It's 1 to 2, yes.
So do you have some, off the top of your head, sense, how many times did we have to request mutual aid coming here?
I can get that for you, but I don't have it right in front of me right
Yeah,
now.
that would give me at least a better sense of how often this comes up.
Yep. And I have the number at the station, but I just don't have it
Thank you.
here.
Sorry.
So, no, don't be surprised. One last question about the budget itself. A1, full-time, the jump from 2020 to 2021 is,
Contract.
Yes.
is the contract?
Well, and you know, the town administrator had the same question when I submitted the budget, so if I may,
Yeah, please, I mean,
I'm
you know, just,
gonna refer to an email that,
well, since the select board already approved it, I'm assuming that it's valid, I just would like to
yeah, no,
know.
it's a very valid question, because
where it
I had
came
to look at it myself, as we were, you know,
So I guess while
programming.
he's looking for it, I can quickly give you a little bit of a response there. So if you'll see towards the bottom of the budget in FY '20 for personnel, we added 2 new firefighters.
Correct.
That dollar amount then goes to the top.
Oh, is that,
Yeah.
I had a feeling it might be that, but.
And also the firefighters union contract, that goes up to the top line. So
Alright.
that's about 200,000 going from the lower area to line A1.
That explains it.
And if I may, just quickly, thank you, Dan. The question came to the police chief earlier about, you know, making the change in the contracts and stepping up
Yes.
compensation.
To try to equalize.
Retain folks.
Yep.
So this is the second, this budget is really the first full year that we've done this.
Right.
And it has had a positive effect.
Good.
It has had a very positive effect.
You know what, I'm really glad to hear that,
um,
because we supported
I
that.
know you, and I appreciate the
And
FinCom's
Because,
stepping up for that, I do. We do.
because it was craziness, and I'm glad to hear that that's out of
So,
positive.
You come with the same sad story.
Well, we do. It's
You know?
just a difference in patch is all it is, and a little difference in the job, but.
It's like, you know,
But, you know, so for, I hate to say this, but, you know, we're approaching February, and we'll go in March, if we get to March, and I'm confident we will get to March, where we have not had to fill a position in a year.
Yeah,
And
wow.
that's a big difference
That's a
from
big
the
difference
last couple of
from
years.
the last
Yeah.
several years.
Yeah, it's huge.
And
So that takes a lot of energy.
well, it takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of time, and again, you go into overtime, because now we're gonna fill the slot for the next, you know, 3 to 4 months of shifts and training, which is another $10,000 to $12,000. And I hate to say this, but folks seem pretty happy right now, so I don't want to jinx myself, but, I mean, they seem very content and
Yeah.
very energized and looking, you know, very much positive,
Good.
so.
And I think, you know, look, the town's never stable, so you can't say you're looking for a steady state situation that's gonna last 10 years or whatever, but for 2-3 years would be nice, you know, so that you can change your priorities and you can
Nice.
just- yeah, and focus somewhere else for a change.
That would be a honeymoon.
Yeah.
On A12, the difference between the TA and yours, 6,360, is that part of the incentive for
Yeah,
firefighters?
so what happens is, as people come and go, Bob, some folks instead of taking the town's health insurance, they have a spouse or significant other that, they don't take the town's health insurance, but there is, in the bargaining agreement, they get a stipend for not taking it. So that changes from year to year depending upon who's coming and going. So for instance, if I got onto my wife's health insurance, instead of, you know, us having the family plan, I went on her health insurance, the town stipend would be X thousands of dollars less for me just not to do that. So that's where that is at, if that answers the question for you.
It's a savings to the town,
It's a
even though,
savings to the town.
even if it looks like it's an expense, it's not, it's a savings.
So is that a difference of opinion, the 0 to 6,300?
No, I'll tell you my logic behind doing this is eventually what I want us to do from an accounting point of view is I want all health insurance costs to be in one line
Right.
item.
And we've
Not
managed to move most
distributed-
of it over.
Not distributed to the
Right.
individual budgets, because health insurance is health insurance, whether it's the
Right.
stipend or whether it's the actual insurance.
Right,
we
so
That
pay
was the
for.
mantra of the town, the new town accountant, who we talked to at the last meeting, yeah. Anybody have any other questions? Thoughts, concerns?
Just one non-budgetary question. When did you get married, and congratulations?
I got married on November 4th, and thank you very much. It was very quiet, just,
I
just a
noticed the ring
couple of
tonight,
us.
so-
Oh, yeah.
Congratulations, I'm glad for you.
Thank you very much, Chief Paul.
Thank you very much.
Did you move to her health insurance?
No, she actually, she moved to mine.
Are you moving off, Kate, taking a better job?
no,
Anything
no.
you want to tell us?
Nope. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Dan, you brought in a packet of stuff. Is there something?
You know what, I don't have my booklet, so this is my budget.
Okay.
Oh.
This is my budget book.
I
You
think.
ran out of money for another notebook?
Being cheap is.
I can give you a notebook.
Strategic planning,
Yeah, I would just say on that
do we have anything?
my hope is that through these sessions, it'll save people from liaising heavily to their
To have to
department
ask that
heads. We
question,
can
yeah.
ask the questions as people come through.
Yeah.
And then if there's anything that jumps out, we'll put it in the report, which is 70% done, ready to go. So,
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you. So it'll get cranked out once we see if there's anything new and important, like the 5 new firefighters. Probably try to find some ballpark number for that. But other than that, no, I would say not. Anybody have a liaison report?
Well, I was gonna have one last month, but it's
You're welcome to
basically
reprise.
I was going to give you a quick rundown of what was going on at the library, but it's basically gonna be in here. So, if you read the library, and the library director will be in on February
So-
12th,
So to the point we just made,
yes, no, this, last month it might have been interesting and we had the time for it, but it wasn't on the agenda.
yeah, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have liaison reports. If you have something you want to report, don't feel like you have to wait till February, whatever it is, to have your department head come in and do it for you.
I
You
will
know.
just say that down the road, the library is going to undergo either a major renovation or reconstruction, and they are just beginning to talk about how to proceed in the timeline, so down the road a bit. The first thing that's gonna happen is a feasibility and study and needs assessment, and that they don't anticipate needing to borrow money to come to us for money for, so we're looking at least a couple of years down the road before.
Yeah, I think the one flying alignment with the library may be the same one as with the elementary school. If they don't get that plan in place for a reasonable amount of time, they may still have to put a sprinkler system in at some point.
So it should be part of the strategic plan, saying here's what we're gonna be looking at.
Correct.
Right,
Yeah.
it can be aligned with the strategic plan, but
Yeah,
we're a
it's
long
not
way
just
from
a
being able to
pretty
firm
round.
up. They
It's a moving target,
It
every,
is.
because you don't know, they don't know.
don't
when
know,
it's
they
gonna
don't know
come.
anything.
Is it on the capital improvement
It's
plan?
not yet, no.
No, it hasn't, it
Because
hasn't
what is
gotten
it,
there
5
yet.
years out, is that what their
It's,
projection is?
it's at least 5 years out.
Okay, so,
And if you looked at, for example, at the capital improvement plan for the school, for the elementary school, they sort of amortize the cost of the sprinkler system on an annualized basis. Instead of showing $1 million in one calendar year, you suddenly see 300,000 out to, well, at least out as far as we're looking, 5 years.
So can
Anyway,
I throw something out, just really, no, I won't, never mind.
that's under other business.
I don't have any other, I'm done. I'm done for the night.
there is no correspondence that I'm aware of. We approved the minutes. We have no transfers that I'm aware of.
We finally found out where our correspondence went.
Yeah. And does anybody have any other business?
I wanted to find out
Yeah.
what we took in for Airbnb revenue, because I think this is the first year. So I don't know how we
Has it
can get
started
that.
coming
I
in
just
yet?
read
When
it,
did it
yeah,
down?
somebody, some other town, it was in the
And I tried to
newspaper. I
fix
think.
Dan, do you have any idea how we can
Yeah,
get,
that's
Yes.
If you caught it.
So the most
It's good
recent
enough.
payment was on December 31st, and it was payments for room sales of August, September, and October. And the increase year over year was 98%. We took in about 170-some thousand last year, and this year the payment was about 340,000.
Well, that's nice to
That's
have.
nice.
and that money gets parked where for the time being?
For the general fund.
Okay.
And I talked to the finance director in Provincetown, because when we got the first payment, which was just July, ours only went up maybe 20,000, and I was kind of disappointed. I thought it was gonna be more than that.
But that would have been actually for
That
June.
was just the month of July,
Okay.
because that's the only time, and there were a number of contracts that were already in place for July, so it didn't apply. So, their increase for that same period for the payment that was received December 31st, ours was 98%, theirs was 50%. So,
Nice.
whatever that means.
Well,
That's
it means
actually-
the people in Provincetown were already paying it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, we have to, as
No, I
we
know,
both
however
said,
you wanna
it'll
look
have
at
to
it.
go for a
It's a
year
great, yeah,
probably
before
we
you
can
get
actually
the,
make
before
any
you can
assumptions on
extrapolate
Well,
the
exactly
it's
how
seasonality.
a nice,
Yeah.
it's a nice cushion to have until we figure out how to spend it. We
Yeah.
will.
And speaking of cushions, in 20 words or less, is there any sort of projection on when pot shops are going to start to open in this town?
Not,
Real ones?
not yet.
Okay.
The temperature in hell hasn't dropped a bit.
The, only one of them has gone through zoning. Another one just went through zoning, but they weren't really that prepared. So they withdrew, how do you say it, withdrew with prejudice, I think is the word they use.
Uh-huh.
So they withdrew their application. I have not heard a word yet of, you know, the first one we approved is next to be ours.
Right.
They haven't done anything with that site, so,
I thought they withdrew.
That site has been
not them,
vacant
the-
so
the-
long.
South Wellfleet General Store is the one that changed, that was,
They moved it down to Dunn.
yeah. And then there's another one that
Is
came
anything
into the
going on
west.
there?
Pardon me?
Is anything going on there?
Not that I'm aware of.
So they're gonna
Depends on
take over
kicking
the.
Mass Appeal out.
So what about the one on Bank Street?
On Bank Street, he just, I don't know where he is in the process. I don't think he's gone to zoning for anything.
That's the one I really hope opens because it's around the corner from me.
Yeah,
So the one that's, if you want to say fast track at this point, is the one that's right on the corner where the bank used to be?
I would say that one is, because that's the only one that I've seen physical evidence of them doing something in the
Yeah,
facility.
well, that's not going to have any impact on
That's what that
traffic.
is?
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
surprised they took the drive up window.
Did you, were you
out.
laughing when you went by? I was like, oh my god,
They
they're
took
taking
the
the
whole-
safe out.
they
Oh, they
took the-
lifted the whole thing.
Helen
out.
Helen has some info.
Well, I can add to this. So a couple months ago, actually a little more recently, I talked to the Cannabis Commission person, any one of us can call him. It's a him. The bottleneck is the state.
No
And the-
kidding.
Yes, but wait, this is obvious, but there are communities that have people who have entered into a host of community agreements, and they have order of preference because they are in areas that have the need to have certain economic groups within those municipalities given help. I'm putting it sort of in non-bureaucratic language. And we're not really in that category. So that was explained to me carefully by this smart guy, and that's where it stopped. In other words, the people that have come to us, and we haven't finished our policy yet, which we need to do so we can refuse people if we want to. We've almost finished it. The select board policy that gives us criteria for saying, no, we want to wait here, and here are the reasons we want to wait, and we can't give you a community host agreement yet. But the real problem is the state, and why should these people pursue, people that have gotten community host agreements, why should they pursue it if they're stuck with the state? Do you see what I mean? Why should they push? Because it's effort and it's money and it's so on and so forth.
As a friend of mine used to say, soon come. I'm gonna entertain a motion to. All in favor?
Yeah.